Welcome into the Dare Miss Fantasy Show with me, your host, Tara Roberts. This is the official mailbag show for Player Profiler. It is Wednesday, August 12th, and I am live here with you taking your questions, and we're doing mailbag questions, of course. This is the official mailbag show for Player Profiler, and we will talk training camp news as well. There's a lot to cover here. A lot of injuries happening, a lot of depth chart battles here as teams are naming their unofficial starters there, and news of actual starters that have been actually named here. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Shout out to the chat, people already in there. Stephen King dropping a comment saying preseason time. I don't know why this year seems harder. I think it's because, we always have battles going on right now. We always have injuries, but there are a lot of weird ones, right? And it feels like, and there's always preseason injuries, but it just feels a little bit uncomfortable with everything that is popping up over and over and over again, right? But we'll talk through it. Shout out to Easy E13 in the chat. Shout out to John in the chat. And right off the bat here, we are going to, as I sit here and add my thing in, because I realized that I didn't add this one in ahead of time here. We're going to do a mailbag right off the bat because it's a special mailbag here. It's a mailbag from the Podfather asking me, what is the absolute ceiling for Omarion Hampton this year? And I thought that it was the perfect mailbag question because it is also newsworthy and timely because our dear friend Mike McDaniel got up on a podium and started talking about how apologizing to us, the fantasy community. Hey, I always think it's funny when the fantasy community is addressed. They know we exist. They care about us, right? But he said sorry and that he was going to disappoint us because he's got 3 running backs in Omarion Hampton and Keaton Mitchell and Kamani Vidal, and they can all be big contributors. So on a week-to-week basis, it could be anybody. Don't let that don't let him getting up there and being a troll, really, because that is it. So like he's trolling, right? Omarion Hampton is their lead back. Now, what we can contextually take away from this, though, is that he does intend to use more than just Omarion Hampton, but we knew that, right? Because it's such an unrealistic scenario. And it happens every now and then, right? Like we had a couple of years there where Kyron Williams was having the most egregious amount of touches ever and on the field, upwards of 90% of snaps. But for the most part, running backs don't typically play 90 plus snaps. There is always change of pace and guys coming in to spell. So you don't have to have just an egregious amount of workload, right? So yes, we expected that there would be some involvement here from these other running backs, and we knew that there was going to be a role here for Keaton Mitchell, not just based off the camp hype that we were getting, but the fact that we have, in fact, had direct information from Mike McDaniel that he specifically wanted Keaton Mitchell, and it makes sense. We've talked about it a little bit before here, especially on videos on my channel where I have talked about Keaton Mitchell as a value, as a, valid sleeper target, because of the fact that it doesn't take a lot for him in terms of touches, especially in the context of what this offense will be, to take the ball and literally run 60 yards and, drive, right? It can happen. So he can be relevant without having to actually usurp a vast majority of touches from Omarion Hampton, right? And it was something that realistically we knew would come into play because Mike McDaniel typically hasn't, granted, it's probably because additionally, he hasn't had a massive back over the years in Miami in the mold of Omarion Hampton. Ollie Gordon's a little sizable, but decently sizable. But as a starter, he's been starting these smaller backs throughout his tenure there, right, as a head coach. So we knew that he was going to, be operating a little bit differently here with a guy like Omarion Hampton, and he might be feeling a little nostalgic and need somebody who can operate more in the form of Devon Etienne, and that would definitely be Keaton Mitchell. So I would expect some involvement, but ultimately, I still trust Omarion Hampton as a clear RB1. He's in the safe RB1 tier for me, right behind Derrick Henry. Teeters back and forth with Josh Jacobs. Jacobs dealing with an injury, my God. And then also, his legal issues, but we've talked about it. Don't think anything will come of that as of this year. But low end RB1. But what is the ceiling for Amari and Hampton? Now, despite the fact that we should get the other backs working in their exchange of pace, Amari and Hampton can't catch. So I wouldn't expect him to be operating in like a Derrick Henry type of style where we see him with 20 receptions max, right? I would expect a little bit more usage on that end. But really, the bread and butter here is going to be the goal line touches. And that's what's going to drive the true ceiling here for Amari and Hampton. How much is the intensity of this offense and the efficiency, productivity of this offense going to increase to open up more goal line opportunities for Amari and Hampton? Because there's a reality in which his ceiling would be that of receptions probably won't get him to the level of overall RB1, but I would say a ceiling of top 3 running back is realistic if we get the amount of goal line touches that would warrant him having in the range of 15 to 16 touchdowns, which is possible, right? If there's a dark horse to contend for most potential touchdowns, most touchdowns in terms of betting, it would potentially be Amari and Hampton there. So, yeah, it's possible, right? So that's the ceiling that I see for him, and a fairly safe floor as well. As long as the offense doesn't go sideways, and I know it feels a little bit uncomfortable because we had him showcased well after Najee Harris went down last season. It feels like 5,000 years ago, right? Najee Harris went down last season, and then we had Amari and Hampton. Then he got injured, and when he came back, he was a lead back, but we were still getting a pretty significant contribution there from Kamani Vidal. That did cap the ceiling a little bit, but that was also in the context of the offense not being as efficient as it should. The defense should still be good. We'll have plenty of pass volume. They should be very balanced there. So, top 3 realistic ceiling, not enough receptions to get him to that overall RB1 ceiling, but still solid draft pick there for us. Easy E says, I'm in no hurry since my draft doesn't start till the weekend before the 2026 season starts. That way, most injuries, we will have a better idea of where the player is at. Yeah, and I don't blame you. I know a lot of people do the whole Labor. I don't actually know when Labor Day is this year, but often it is coinciding with Labor Day or at least the week after there. So, and that's pretty typical. I've got one draft that is starting. I've done, you guys know, I've done quite a few drafts, but I've got one redraft league that is starting next Monday. I'm doing Jake Seeley's Flex Leagues. That's going to be fun. So I'll tell you guys about that as well. But yeah, some people like to start it a little early, but hey, need to get prepped and ready to go for a draft season. So you're in the know and everything is good to go when you do draft. Stephen King says, Hampton or Genty? I was doing a live show and I think I got this exact question earlier on another channel. And for me, it is Genty. It's not a massive gap. But again, the difference there would be while Hampton plays in the clear better offense, Genty does have the clear higher receiving upside. So the gap between them is not that significant. For me, they're both Genty, I would feel a little bit more comfortable taking like on the 1-2 turn if you have a late pick. Hampton, slightly more comfortable in early second round, but I mean, we're squabbling at that point, really. Guys that you would feel comfortable taking at the turn, early second round picks at the very least, probably not going to slip past mid round there. Genty is my preference, but the margin is like literally maybe like 3 players or so. So very, very close there. Very, very close. Genty is interesting because, it's funny. We talk about people get very apprehensive about players in bad offenses and overreact and often say, we don't draft players in bad offense. Don't draft players in bad offenses. If you can't take that strategy in terms of approach. Don't overdraft players in bad offenses, but also recognize what is contextually a bad offense for certain players, right? For Genty, with Kirk Cousins at quarterback, we've already seen the version, the post Achilles, the aging version, the not so Minnesota version of Kirk Cousins last year in Atlanta. And that version was not a problem for Bijan Robinson, okay? He is not a bad quarterback for running backs. He has no problem checking down. And then we'll have Fernando Mendoza at some point as well. Rookie quarterback, smart quarterback that'll come in and rely on checkdowns as well for his very talented pass catcher there. So And really, when we're looking at the pass catchers, obviously, excuse me, obviously, one of the things about the pass catchers that we should recognize is that we know it's Bowers. And with the receiving core, we're trying to figure out, is Naylor the one that we want? Is Trey Tucker the one that we want? I think it also depends slightly on what quarterback we have in there. But at the end of the day, Genty's pass contributions might be the most consistent behind Brock Bowers. So that also helps him give the little edge there as well. Easy E in the chat saying queens are usually fashionably late, but that's their prerogative. I thought I was going to be late. I actually it's been a day, guys, for me. This was the first day of school for my boys. So I got them off this morning. And ironically, it was my heaviest work day of the week. This is my third show of the day, and that does not include short videos as well. So yeah, it's been a long day, and I had the audacity to try to go to the gym in between shows, which worked out well. We'll see how my body feels about that choice tomorrow, but I wanted to take advantage of actually being able to leave the house since my kids are now back at school. So there we go. Easy says, girl, quite a few drafts is an understatement for you. I love drafting. It's fun. Actually, I really don't even do that much, guys. It's not as bad as you would think there. And then one more question before we take a little break here, from Easy E says, in my wide receiver 3 super flex league, I am looking in the later rounds for quarterbacks. Kyler Murray, Malik Willis, Tyler Shuck, or Baker Mayfield. I like to fill in running backs and wide receivers first. I think that is a very valid approach, even in Superflex this season. Now, I'm still partial to taking a top 10 quarterback in Superflex, but depending on the format, especially it depends on the scoring format, because you guys know in my Scott Fishbowl, because the scoring for it's Superflex, but because the scoring for wide receivers was so trumped up, I did push quarterback back, right? All the way back to, I think it was Baker Mayfield that I pushed it back to, or Tyler Shuck, one of the other. But I'm not opposed to it. Depending on what the league size is there, especially because that's a 3 wide receiver league. And I was actually asked this question earlier today as well. Like, are you comfortable with Kyler Murray as a QB1? And I think I am. Maybe in Superflex, like a little less, just because of the fact that if there is an injury, your direct pivot, you would either have to be drafting 3 deep at quarterback, which, in Superflex, if you're pushing quarterback towards later, I would recommend, okay, Easy E says 10 team. That's more realistic, right? If you're pushing quarterback towards later, I think that's the, one tip that I would say. You do need to make sure that you're rostering 3 startable ones. So you've got 2 guys at the very least that barring some or unforeseen injury and they don't have significant injury history, will make it through the season, right? That's my only concern there. With Kyler Murray is the fact that obviously we've seen him play full seasons, but we have seen plenty of seasons where he unfortunately didn't make it through, or was at least playing through an injury at the end of the season that, hampered his production. Same thing with Malik Willis, could be an absolute cheat code this year in Superflex. But there always is the risk that he could end up like Justin Fields. I feel more positively about it. And there's been, the camp reports haven't been bad, people. They haven't been bad. I'm not saying that we need to buy into the Dolphins being a prolific offense or anything, or even an average offense, but it might be workable, guys. It might not be a fantastic season for them, but from a fantasy perspective, Malik Willis, our high-end options that we would actually want to start in terms of Malik Willis and Devon Etienne, are going to be usable assets there and perform to our expectations. That's all I'm saying there. And then Tyler Shuck, no threat there. Baker Mayfield, no threat there as well. So yeah, for sure. Do a few more comments here since we've got these in here. Loving Life says, I hear Lemon in Philadelphia is having lingering leg issues. Could this be an opening for Wicks? I actually tweeted about Wicks today. Wicks is a player that I think is a dark horse kid. I will not want to. Now, technically, I do have one dynasty team that I do have him on, and it's a weird, very extensive starting lineup league where you start 5 wide receivers. It's insanity. I probably will have to start Dontavian Wicks in that league at some point, but I actually tweeted about Wicks earlier today that I think he's a candidate for being one of those guys who you never start throughout the season, right? Because you're too scared. And you get to the end of the season and he actually has flex worthy, like top 36 production on a pretty frequent basis, and you just didn't use it because it was Dontavian Wicks. So I agree with you on that one. High chance that this is, and we're hearing lots of positive reports about Dontavian Wicks, right? And additionally, on that, we do have to remember that the new offensive coordinator is Sean Mannion. Sean Mannion from Green Bay. Dontavian Wicks from Green Bay. As much as we, him and haw about, the connection between, Liam Cohen in college and Chris Rodriguez and this, hey, we've got to do an offensive coordinator or a guy that came over to be a new offensive coordinator and literally brought over one of his wide receivers. So that is something to note, especially because it does sound like, regardless of the whole Lemon thing, that Wicks was going to be the guy starting on the outside opposite of Devontae Smith. Sorry, guys, I have a little bit of a cough there today. So on the podcast, I'm trying to mute you just so we don't have to have those in there as much as humanly possible. But yeah, Wicks should be a starter. How consistent that is going to be, it's tough to say just because of, again, we expect this Philadelphia offense to be run heavy, but it is good to know that this is someone who could be a deeper sleeper for you guys to grab, who could be a bye-week fill-in or flex option, and just someone to have on your bench as well. Do expect, obviously, Devontae Smith to thrive there. I like Dallas. I've come around a lot to the idea of Dallas Goedert now that, we've heard that Eli Stowers is not doing fantastic this offseason, was dealing with some injury, wasn't really participating. We're not expecting him to be an early contributor this season. So Dallas Goedert, at the end of the day, Dallas Goedert, probably going to be a solid red zone target. We saw the massive increase in touchdowns last season as we saw the decrease in usage. As AJ Brown got his frustrations, and that was a big tie to it. We had a lot of big targets to Dallas Goedert. So that's another one to keep out on. Now, Leaving says Green Bay never supported 2 fantasy receivers. Philadelphia can't support 3. So Green Bay never supported 2 fantasy receivers because Green Bay's committee ran oddly deep, right? Because you think about it from that context, that we were talking about Dontavian Wicks in Green Bay, and Dontavian Wicks was never a starter in Green Bay. Now, granted, he did start when obviously there were multiple injuries happening there. But at the end of the day, we never had consistency from any of the wide receivers because they were rotating through too many bodies. No one was ever really garnering. Like, if you look at some offenses, certain wide receivers will be on the field consistently, always, never coming off, rarely coming off, strong snap counts. Green Bay's wide receivers would fluctuate in these weird ranges and rotations. So it just wasn't really workable from a fantasy perspective. But it sounds like Philadelphia is very solidified and not doing a deep rotation, but rather Devontae Smith, Dontavian Wicks, and Mekhi Lemon. So will they support it on a high-end perspective where they're going to be producing 2 top 24 receivers with high upside on a weekly basis? No, probably not, right? But that contextually was a lot of what we saw in Philadelphia since the arrival of Jalen Hurts on a Saquon Barkley. On a week-to-week basis, they are run heavy, and so you will have that variance. So it won't really be dramatically different from that perspective, but usable flex options, yes. Usable flex options, yes. Yeah, Easy says, what the freak? Starting 5 wide receivers, that sounds crazy. It is. It is the nastiest, actually. Yeah, I can read you the roster. Actually, no, I won't do that. I won't waste your time. But it does go ridiculously deep, and waivers are ugly and nasty, but it is fun. It is fun. let's see here. And also while we're on the subject here, Easy E brings up Jalen Hurts, which is an interesting one because Jalen Hurts is kind of in that no man land of, after we feel comfortable with obviously are Josh Allen and Lamar and Drake May and Joe Burrow. And then you get into this area of, hey, it's Jaden Daniels, who, how much do we trust him? Down year last year because of injury, but also really when he was healthy as well at the beginning of the season, definite regression in terms of the production that he had in his rookie season. And Jalen Hurts, honestly, not the highest ceiling in terms of being able to get up there with Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. But I have tried to go through and look at his stats and find excuses to not draft him. And honestly, guys, it's a very safe floor, especially if we do continue to see his usage in terms of running. Sean Mannion said they're still going to do the tush push there. So he's not taking away that from that perspective. So he's a safe pick. I mean, I think his ADP is a little high. I find myself passing over him just to get the, guys that offer a little bit more value as low end QB1s, but still very reasonable there. If by chance in your league he falls because people don't want any part of it, right? Before we jump back into the questions here, because you guys are dropping some great ones in the chat and continue to drop them as well, we're going to take a short break to hear about a fantastic tool from Player Profiler, the Injury Finder.
You may draft a great team in fantasy football, but if those players get hurt, you're toast. So let's put my glasses on here, and we're going to talk about injury probability because we have the data, and now we have an app called the Injury Finder where you can look up if a player is more likely than another player to get hurt and miss significant time for your fantasy team this year. Running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends. We have all of their precise injury probabilities. It is in the App Store right now. It is $5 for the 2026 injury probabilities. Check it out. It's injuryfinder.com, App Store, Google Play, $5. You're welcome.
There we go. Injury Finder with Player Profiler. All right, let's talk about, speaking of injuries, why don't we talk about some of the injuries that are going on throughout the league, what matters, the depth charts, the battles that are happening here. I think injury, update to discuss probably at the top here would be, oh, my list is a little off. Probably let's start off at the top here and talk about the injury to the 49ers. We talked about it a little bit last week here, but obviously the injuries that are going on in terms of players sitting out there. One of the things that we had was tweets coming out tweets from a beat reporter in San Francisco, basically anointing Dejon Stribling as the most fantastic receiver, the best receiver on the 49ers roster. Look, that's a little inaccurate, right? That's not correct at the end of the day. Look, he's exaggerating a wee bit there. Not anything that we need to kind of overreact to. Still a fine late round value guy, but not something that we need to start shooting up the draft boards and thinking that is going to be a starter that we need to overdraft there. But again, good late round value there. But Deebo Samuel, also someone that we want to look at. Honestly, Deebo plays through injuries. But he tends to come back from, injuries that actually do keep him out. Remember the time he had pneumonia or something like that and came back fairly quickly? He tends to not have long extended absences there. So honestly, he could also benefit significantly as well. Christian McCaffrey, there are thumbnail banner player there dealing with calf tightness, right? Not calf tightness, but just general tightness. And calf tightness was what we had in the previous year. So when the word tightness gets thrown around there, we get a little bit concerned with Christian McCaffrey. And I think it's worth mentioning, and it's tough to kind of pinpoint and say, okay, well, make sure that you grab his handcuffs. All the handcuffs are hurt too, right? But it's worth mentioning because McCaffrey is one of the mid-round picks that I think people debate over a lot, because when it gets to that point, your decision is basically, are you going with Christian McCaffrey or are you going to continue on with the wide receivers, kind of like the second-tier wide receivers that come after Puka Nacua and Jamar Chase, and they're not really second tier players, but we know that they're a tier like slightly less than those guys. It would be JSN and Amon-Ra St. Brown. JSN, obviously, massive amount of targets and upside last year, but potential for some regression this year. So he does kind of fall just kind of in like a 1B compared to those other two guys. And then obviously Amon-Ra, who is has been very steady in his production, consistent top 5 production there, very reliable. And the question is whether you go with that or do you take the chance of going with Christian McCaffrey? I personally have been very hesitant, and I know the upside that he offers, but the reality is that he had over 400 touches last year. And we've seen a pattern with him in previous seasons multiple times that when he has those high outlier season with a ton of touches, finishes as the overall RB1. Unfortunately, there we see him turn around the next year and not make it through the majority of the season because that's aggressive wear and tear on the body. So for him to get this tightness in preseason, it is a little bit concerning. And I don't know that we're going to see a significant drop in ADP that would warrant us saying, oh, well, buy the value, buy the dip here. So keep your eye on that one, especially because Kyle Shanahan is not the most trustworthy when it comes to being very transparent regarding injuries and timelines there. So just keep that in mind. But when we're looking at, and I love the comments here, Leaving says the substation. I know, right? The substation again, right? It is coming and it's attacking every single one of them. Every single one of them. I mean, even Nick Bosa was dealing with some kind, what was it? I can't remember exactly if it was a hamstring or something, but Nick Bosa, like a hamstring or a quad or something, they're all dealing with attacks from the substation or poor training staff that they refuse to address properly. Whatever it is, regardless, watch out for those 49ers injuries. But again, Christian McCaffrey is one that I am cautiously stepping over, particularly when we have so much value with the second round running backs. I mean, we talked about Amari and Hampton earlier and Ashton Genty. That doesn't even touch on guys like Chase Brown, Saquon Barkley, Devon Etienne, who, again, we talked about a little bit, just like the fear of him not producing at an adequate level just is a wee bit over exaggerated. I mean, we even had comments from Miami coaching stating that they will be giving him a extremely aggressive workload, wanting him to touch the ball as much as humanly possible, which sounds crazy. But at the end of the day, they think they're competing, right? They're not intentionally trying, like you can say they're intentionally trying to tank or whatever, like, but the players are showing up on the field to win. The coaching staff, in theory, does want to coach to win as well. It's a new coaching staff, right? For the most part, the offensive coordinator has stayed the same. But at the end of the day, we're going to see an egregious amount of touches for Etienne. So that was good confirmation there. But even then, so pushing back further, we've got Derrick Henry, who you can get in the early third round. You've then got Josh Jacobs, who, if there were no legal issues, he would be a clear top 12 back, right? So when you're looking at this in the depth, I don't know why you have to take that level of risk with Christian McCaffrey, which I know his ceiling is super high. But if the associated risk that we've seen in this really particular pattern in terms of egregious usage and over 400 touches just in the regular season, that does not include playoffs, is an egregious amount of touches. So just keep that in mind there. Thank you there for the super chat from Erwin. I don't know why I can't see. My screen is like really weird in terms of the setup here, just not allowing me to see the usernames good. But thank you, Erwin Lockridge, for the super chat there. Appreciate it. And then staying on the topic of the 49ers, Loving Life says, I don't usually handcuff wide receivers, but dribbling for Mike Evans' insurance policy in best ball. I think it's worth it. It's worth it to take a stab at multiple 49ers receivers because as we've seen time and time again, the system dictates that when people go down, somebody else will step up, right? I mean, how did Juwan Jennings become a fantasy darling, right? With the massive high upside. Now he's a wide receiver 3 there in Minnesota. So the system, Ricky Pearsall is out, right? So the system does dictate that these guys will get opportunities for sure. Miles Logan says, which two hero RBs would you pair together? Think of using this strategy if I have the 11th pick in my PPR 12 team league. So with 11th pick, there are options that you could go with, right? You can go with James Cook there. Yeah, James Cook should be available there. Let me double check for you at the 11th pick. Like, I don't want to lie to you. I'm looking at ADP right now overall. Ninth pick, so around there, but that's adjusting. But you could potentially get James Cook there, depending on how the early round shakes out. You could get Saquon there. I feel very comfortable with Saquon. We talked about, again, as things are kind of, evening out in the wide receiver room, trying to get a feel for how they are doing. We know that they are going to lean on Saquon Barkley, and I do like Saquon for a bounce back there. So Saquon is a really good one. His ADP over on Fantasy Pros right now, in terms of real-time ADP, is literally pick 11. So that's a good one there. And then obviously you guys know that I am higher on Devon Etienne. That's a personal choice. If you would like to take that personal journey with me, I am okay with it. But I can admit there that I take the value in the second round on Etienne. Like, just because you don't have to push it to the first round, because it is, falling back in ADP as people are becoming more apprehensive, and you can take something else in the first round and then get Etienne in the second. So I don't think it's necessary. But Barkley would be probably my favorite right there for you. And then in terms of pairing it up, I like to push it back to, you could push it back theoretically as far, I wouldn't go too far past if you want to play it risky, right? But since you're picking at the end there, like if it were Bijan, I was doing mock drafts the other day, and if I were picking up at the top with Bijan or Jahmyr Gibbs, I feel comfortable pushing back a hero RB strategy to get a little bit riskier and push all the way back to potentially a guy like Jalen Warren if you have to, right? And then, come back around and get another running back as an RB3 that can realistically be a starter. But picking from the 11th spot there, I don't want to push it back that much. So I would go Saquon, and my cutoff point would probably be Jadarian Price. But really and truly, I don't mind pushing it up like a little bit more and going with a DeAndre Swift. I'm coming around to that one a lot, is one that I am really enjoying targeting as an RB2. DeAndre Swift is going, I want to say, yeah, borderline, like at the 4-5 turn there. Pick 409 right now, and it's moving up a little bit. And that, unfortunately, in terms of why it's moving up just a tiny bit, is because we've got injuries to receivers overall in that area. So it's pushing his ADP up just like a tiny bit there. But realistically, you can potentially get Swift in the 5th round. I don't hate pushing it back. And again, this one is more of a personal choice, right? But I wouldn't mind pushing it back to even a Quinshawn Judkins or David Montgomery as an RB2 and a hero RB strategy when you're taking an RB in the first round. So you've got a very strong option. I could push it back as far as David Montgomery as well. Yeah. And for the record, I do have Jadarian Price right behind David Montgomery, FYI, because I said that backwards. I said I'd push it back to Price and then Montgomery. Yeah, but that's the approach there. And I've been implementing a lot of hero RB, and a lot of people are wanting to go robust RB, doubling up at running back, especially people that have 11th or 12th picks at the turn, just because it's very easy to double up at running back there, which I get, but I still prefer a hero RB strategy on that one for sure. And you can also push your hero RB back to round 2. It doesn't have to be taken with that first round pick if you're on the turn there, because you have the ability to get all the way up to, an Amari Hampton or Derrick Henry in the second round as well. So I'm pro going that direction as well. If you want to grab a wide receiver in round 1 and your hero RB in round 2, just note that it doesn't have to come in round 1 just because we're so deep at RB1s this year for sure. Shout out to jumping to the chat here. Shout out to Jay Main in the chat. How are you doing? Leaving says Demarcus Robinson will be free. Stribling hype moved him up. The longer Evans is gimpy. Yeah, but it's not moving up too bad. I would, and this is coming from someone who has defended Demarcus Robinson so much over the past several years as a solid waiver wire ad, but last year really just didn't live up. So I feel like he might have hit a cliff. Did not give me what I was expecting last year. And while the Stribling ADP is moving up, it's not moving up that much. Like it's on the rise, but still in real time ADP, it's around 18. So unless it were to push up above round 15, which with the addition of Debo Samuel, I don't think it will. We're okay. So as long as that's the baseline, it doesn't push around above round 15, I would still definitely lean into Stribling. That's still not too high for him, over Demarcus Robinson for sure. And that's somebody who, again, I've been very pro Demarcus Robinson over the years. And you also got to, there's Christian Kirk there as well. But again, that's someone who often doesn't make it through seasons. So it was already dealing with an injury. So again, yeah, Stribling, if you're going on a late round one, that's the one that I lean into for sure. From CMAS, do you favor drafting a top defense or waiting until later and streaming your defenses on a week-to-week basis? It depends on the sleepers that are on the board, and also knowing depends on the sleepers that are on the board, the depth of the bench, and knowing my league mates as well. This season, more than likely, I will push it to the very second last because I like to leave kicker for last. I really don't care which way I flip flop it. It doesn't matter to me. But no, it'll be one of my last two picks this year because I do like a lot of the late round rookie wide receivers. We talked about not just Deshaun Stribling because his is more of injury opportunity. Again, I've talked about the fact that I like Jacoby Lane, Ted Hurst there. Pay attention to that one. Denzel Boston, I love a lot. So those are guys that I would prioritize getting onto my roster and not reaching over to get one of the top defenses because I don't mind streaming on a week-to-week basis. I play DFS, so I got to look for streaming options on a weekly basis anyway. So I'm cool with it. Streaming defenses can low-key be fun. And then let's go on to another question here before I go back to the injuries. Easy E says the only players I'm thinking about in the 49ers are Mike Evans. Casey Coleman says 2020 equals 287 carries, hurt the next. Oh, this is regarding Chris McCaffrey. There we go. 2020 equals 287 carries, hurt the next year. 2023 carried 272 times, the most out of 2024 and 2025. Carried the ball. Sorry. Let me read that back again. Carried the ball 272 times in 2023 and was out most of 2024. And then 2025 carried the ball over 300 times. Very nervous about him this year. Yeah, it's a clear pattern. And I try not to put age regression and workload too much onto players, but it's real. You see it often. That's why I think, Saquon Barkley had a subpar season. He didn't quite look like himself, regression overall. The offense as a whole had issues, but you could see that he was just not as efficient as he was. What did he do the previous year? Over 340 carries plus carries on the way to the Super Bowl. So CMC had over 400 touches last season. That was absolutely ridiculous in terms of the workload for sure. From Zenrock says, what if you're picking third and both the top running backs are gone and you play in 12-team, half PPR with two starting running backs? What would you do? I would still go with wide receiver. And again, my preference still is Puka Nacua. I know that we heard there could be legal action. We're almost at the beginning of the season. From that perspective, you would likely see if they tried to do something, you would likely see some kind of appeal. Like I find it hard to believe that a suspension would be enacted in this season right here. And we're this close to the season, right? So I'm not overly reacting to that. My preference is still Puka, but if you're worried about that, go with Ja'Marr Chase. It's not an issue. And also, Ja'Marr Chase, I do feel a little bit more comfortable with this year because I always get irritated with the lack of reliability that we have from Joe Burrow in terms of health. But always remember that they did retain Joe Flacco. And once Joe Flacco came over last year, we had zero issues from anybody. So if you're worried about the Bengals in any way, shape, or form, just always remember that They were perfectly, like him, Jamar T, Chase Brown, they were perfectly fine once Joe Flacco came over. So they're good to go. Don't worry on that end. So if you want safety and you're worried about potential suspension there, just go with Jamar. Not a big deal. Otherwise, if you want to be risky, as I do, go with Puka because the ceiling is absolutely stupid there. Mind you, he's in a contract year, right? The contract is coming, right? It not technically, right? In terms of they could still push it out a little bit more, but the contract is coming. He knows that he needs to put up and he knows that he needs to behave and he knows that he needs to showcase in a way that is warranting getting one of those top contracts, right? No off-season antic or no more off the field antics from him. So feel a little bit positive that we're not going to see any of that in season here, right? So, my preference there, if the running backs are off the board, is to go wide receiver because once you come around back to your second round pick, even in 12 team, you're still looking at, let's see here. We have scrolling up here in ADP, you would be coming around and be able to get in terms of running backs. It would be guys that you could potentially have like Derrick Henry. If you want to get Josh Jacobs, that would be my preference. I have Josh Jacobs higher than ADP as I would feel more comfortable with grabbing Josh Jacobs. Kyron Williams, you could also go with as well. So you would still end up with somebody that can give you RB1 numbers for sure. That would be my preference on that one. Let's jump to a mailbag here real quick. And I think this is a good one for us to do. So we're talking about all the 49ers receivers. Let's transition to the Bucks receivers here. Who do you have for the best value pick for the Bucks? This is a good one because we have had, first of all, we had a little injury scare from Mekabuka. Doesn't sound like it's a major issue. Thank God for that. I did not want to have to deal with all of the potential issues there and trying to figure out if he was going to, have to go the Luther Burden route of sitting out preseason and whatnot. So thank God, it doesn't seem like it's anything major. Then we have Chris Godwin, and then we have I have Ted Hurst pictured there, and then there's also Jalen McMillan. For the record, Jalen McMillan is theoretically the starter right now, but in my opinion, what it's going to end up being is Ted Hurst, Chris Godwin, and Emeka Egbuka as the starters there. Because Jalen McMillan can play in a wide variety of locations, but his most ideal position is the one that Chris Godwin possesses. So McMillan, I do think, would come into play potentially if we were to see Godwin continue to deal with injury issues. But from all the reports, sounds like he is doing good, explosive. They say looking like his old self. Now, how long that will last? Because honestly, guys, it's been a long time since we have seen Chris Godwin operating at full capacity. I just want to kind of keep that in mind as we debate out the wide receivers here, particularly when it comes to Emeka Egbuka, because I see a lot of differing opinions on Emeka Egbuka and his productivity last year in relation to Chris Godwin. Just note that Chris Godwin did come back early in the season, right? And that was right after Mike Evans went down, and Godwin wasn't slowly ramped up. He immediately came on and played a regular snap count. Saw 10 targets in his first game, saw 4 targets in the next. It was a difficult matchup, but he was on the field upwards of 70% of snaps. So he had 14 targets over that time period of those 2 games. And we did have, getting text messages, and I realize you guys can hear that. The text is coming from inside the house. You would think they would know I'm doing a show right now and wouldn't be doing that, wouldn't be sending it to me. But regardless, what we had there in those 2 games, those were the 2 games where Emeka Egbuka had over 100 yards. And that was against very stiff competition of, let me double check for you guys. It was Philadelphia and Seattle. Yep, it was Philadelphia and Seattle where Chris Godwin played over 70% of snaps, and Emeka Egbuka was operating as the wide receiver 1 there. So please don't think that Chris Godwin's downturn in production later in the season was because of the presence, Emeka Egbuka's downturn later in the season was because of the presence of Emeka Egbuka. It had nothing to do with that. It was in relation to, one, Emeka Egbuka was playing through a hamstring injury. He got a hamstring injury. He played through it, did not go out, but you could tell it did affect him. And then also we had Baker Mayfield playing through injuries, wildly ineffective as a whole. The whole pass game, there was no receiver particularly thriving over that time period, and they were dealing with offensive line injuries as well. So, with that in mind, these two guys can do well together and play off of each other. And Tampa Bay is not a heavy 12 personnel team. So, three wide receivers have the ability to perform and put up on a weekly basis there in Tampa Bay, right? So Emeka Egbuka is still the clear target for me. But because Chris Godwin's ADP is very, very sweet, looking at it right now, Godwin's ADP is wide receiver 37. That is a late 8th round pick. That is very reasonable for him. So I'm not opposed to, if you aren't able to snag Emeka Egbuka, because it is more difficult because he does have the higher wide receiver 18-ish ADP right now. It's okay to grab Chris Godwin, or you can push it back and also go with the deep sleeper in Ted Hurst as well, because I really do believe in the impact that he is going to be able to make. That is one of my favorite late rookie sleeper targets as well. Ted Hurst there. So jumping to the chat here. Um, Jay Layball says, I love the Bucks rookie as a late pick. There we go. We're on the Ted Hurst train here he's looked fantastic all training camp. When you're immediately like, they have a clear role for him and saying like, hey, he's an X receiver. They know exactly what they want him to do in that offense. And visually, like in terms of not just visual, but in terms of alignment, visually in terms of alignment on the field, it lines up perfectly for Hurst, Egbuka, and Godwin to all be on the field together, because they all can play three very specific and different roles there. So, yes, 100%. Jay Main says, we had Chris Godwin in the trenches, his fam. We had Chris Godwin in the trenches, his fam from the hood. And which, warrants for him having he's 30, right? But, last go around for him. Try and make it happen here. Obviously, he's had a wonderful long career with the Bucks. Bear in mind, it has been a long career with the Bucks, which is the other thing that you do have to consider. Last time we saw him play a full season was 2023. Obviously, the effects of his injury previously, he had multiple offseason surgeries. You could see it last season, right? But even then, before he was injured, right? We got to remember that he was never really operating as the wide receiver one there. And technically speaking, are you ever going to operate as the wide receiver one opposite of, Mike Evans? No, right? But he was never a massive red zone target. Early on in his season, he had, some hires when he had, Jameis Winston chucking the ball right. But for the most part, when this offense settled in, this was a low touchdown guy here. So I would expect if we were going to look in terms of how they would functionally fit together, we might have higher targets to Chris Godwin, but higher fantasy production and touchdowns overall and yardage would definitely tilt towards Emeka Egbuka there. So jumping back here from to the chat here, Jay Main says, talk me off the sun god at 7th. Talk me off the sun god at 7th. I will not do that. I love Amon-Ra. He's such a safe, happy pick in the first round. Is he ever going to be Puka? No, just because, the volume doesn't particularly warrant it, and the usage doesn't warrant it, right? Just because of the role that he particularly plays. But we're talking about a man that has been a top 5 receiver for back-to-back-to-back years. Has it been 3 years that he has been? Let me double check there. It's been 3 years. Yes, 3 years of back-to-back-to-back finishes as the overall wide receiver 3 in PPR. The man had 172 targets, by the way. By the way, they do have an offensive. The center. There was a center injury. The Lions center got injured. I believe it's a 8 to 10 week timeline. That's worrisome. I am concerned about that. I'm not going to lie there. But I have been very much so in on the Lions offense because they have a beautiful schedule. It's an easy schedule, but it's more than an easy schedule because it is a back half of the season dome friendly schedule. They literally play outside like 2 times, and one is an international game, and the other one is not a real difficult weather game. The only issue is their week 17 game, I believe, is in Chicago. That's the literal only issue. But overall, the amount of domes that we have for Jared Goff, good weather games, going to be really good for him. So, in a very easy schedule alignment. So, I'm not too panicked about that because overall, it's just a very good setup for this offense to push a lot of volume. And keep in mind, their defense, particularly the secondary, is still very suspect. They're dealing with multiple injuries continuously in their secondary. Looks like those guys are not going to be ready to start the season, or even if they do, maybe a little bit hampered there. So if their defense is still struggling in the secondary, aggressive pass volume, honestly, it's just going to be them having to continue to light it up and push pass volume. So I would not be shocked if we saw Amon-Ra cross that 170 target threshold yet again, for sure. And yeah, the week 17, unfortunately, there in Chicago is not ideal, but hey, I will deal with that for the beautiful schedule that it has as a whole. Just make sure that you make a contingency plan potentially there, not for Amon-Ra, he should still be fine, but make a contingency plan there for Jameson and Jared Goff would be the two. And comment here in the chat, Vipers Network says, who is the coolest Viper you know? Well, that would be Matt Donnelly. Matt Donnelly would be the coolest Viper that I know. Matt Donnelly there, Dynasty Vipers in the chat. Oh, and that means I need to send a text message. I'm going to send you a text message because I miss you. Thank you for being in the chat there. Matt Donnelly is the person who got me into doing podcasting for fantasy football. Oddly enough, yeah. Jumping back here to the chat, Henry Odom says, I find myself staring at Christian McCaffrey, CeeDee Lamb, and Justin Jefferson at the end of the first. I can't take McCaffrey. Do you feel the same way? 100%. I can't do it. I can't. I've come around more to drafting CeeDee Lamb because I don't love that his ceiling is capped with George Pickens there. Like, I've come to accept the fact that he does not have the same level of upside that he had before Pickens got there, just from a pure volume perspective, because of the touchdowns tilting down. But the targets were still there, right? You kind of have to parse through it because he was dealing with injuries. He didn't play complete games, right? So if you really parse it down to the games where he played the majority of snaps, he was still on pace for 150 targets. So there's not a massive decrease in volume there for him. I still feel comfortable with him as a safe pick compared to some of the other wide receivers we've got there. Justin Jefferson, now that we officially have Kyler Murray listed as the starter, I do feel a lot better about it, right? How can we trust Kyler to make it through the entire season? That's another story, but at the very least, I am happy that it will be Kyler compared to JJ McCarthy. And in Kyler's defense, right? It's been a long time since Kyler has had an actual wide receiver one. We got to remember that he was dealing with Marvin Harrison Jr., who we all know lacks massive consistency, right? Really, his wide receiver one there was Trey McBride, who did get fed, right? But that was for a short period of time. Before that, he was dealing with guys like Marquise Hollywood Brown as his wide receiver one, Christian Kirk as his wide receiver one, right? There were some sketchy years where he didn't really have high-end bodies. The last true wide receiver one that he had was DeAndre Hopkins, who unfortunately didn't play, a couple seasons he didn't play in full. But the one season that he did play in full with Kyler Murray, he was in fact a wide receiver one with a ton of targets there. So I feel comfortable that Kyler is going to be able to find plenty of Justin Jefferson. We'll do a few more questions and then we'll wrap it up here. Jay Label says this may be Baker's last run with the Bucs. Not sure it's going to be a good year for the offense as a whole. I feel the opposite because we're in a Baker Mayfield contract situation where they were trying to work something out. They did offer him. He just felt disrespected by the offer, didn't feel like it was up to par to where he should have been offered. And I totally understand that, right? He wants a certain level. He has put up numbers and he feels like, hey, I'm a steady, stable starter. I deserve a certain level of money. So they ended their contract talks because it just wasn't remotely where he wanted it to be. So he is now fighting for the contract that he wants, whether that is with Tampa Bay or another team there. So it's a motivated Baker Mayfield in a contract year. So I kind of feel the opposite because, Baker is that guy that has that dog in him, right? So when push comes to shove, he put his back up against the wall. I'm gonna put my money on Baker on that one, right? To put up numbers there. And in his defense, in terms of what he did last season, he was dealing with injuries and playing through them, which he often does, right? But he was playing through injuries. You could tell, you saw the immediate cutoff point of where he really fell off there because at the beginning of the season, Baker was on fire. And actually, you know what? Let me defend Baker a little bit here and pull up his numbers from last season. It'll take me a second. Internet is fast enough to pull up the numbers here for him and see what his QB finishes were on a week-to-week basis. All right, so there we go. Baker Mayfield at the beginning, of course, there's an ad in the way that is actually blocking me from being able to see. That's not cool. Not an ad. Okay, there we go. Baker Mayfield started off in week 1 as QB 12, followed up by 15, 8, 10, 6, 11. A couple of down weeks is QB 20 and 26, had a bye week, then QB7, and then that's where everything went sideways from that point forward. It wasn't that he played. It was actually a fairly easy schedule because the back half of the season was loaded with a lot of NFC South games, which technically speaking, they're not defensive layups, right? Carolina and Atlanta can get up there in terms of their pass defense. So let me not say that. They're not cupcake matchups because they have excellent secondaries. But from week 12 on, he only had one QB1 performance. He was playing through injuries. Prior to that, the man had a ridiculous amount of QB1 performances. He doesn't have the legs to give him that weekly top 5 upside, but low wing QB1 on a weekly basis is very realistic for him for sure. And mind you, that was with multiple receivers out and dealing with injuries. So the fact that he was even able to manage to do that through all of the injuries was pretty impressive here. So I do got to defend Baker a little bit on that. And I'm expecting a bounce back year. Not to the level that he was in the outlier year where he had like the 41 touchdowns now. But the previous year before that, I think, is a very realistic standpoint for him. What was that? So that was 28 touchdowns, 10, 10 interceptions, but 4,000 yards. And that's the difference. The yardage was really nice and safe there. So we got a good baseline. So I'm expecting a bounce back there for him. That 41 touchdown year was crazy though. A few more things here and then we will head on out here. Oh, this is a good one here. From Tyler Sperry. Thoughts on Diggs in Hampton. We talked about Hampton earlier. I feel good about him. Don't overreact to Mike McDaniel. In terms of, since we're wrapping things up, I won't belabor it, but don't read too much into what Mike McDaniel was saying about multiple backs here and there. We always knew there was going to be change of pace. This Chargers offense is going to bounce back significantly there, have higher upside, push more volume, more goal line opportunities. So I feel good with Hampton as a low end RB1. Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs is interesting because I think we need to level set, right? Because I've seen a lot of, we want him to get that same, production that he had from, the Patriots. We want that to transition over. Well, two different teams, two different situations, and he was the wide receiver 1 there. I would not expect that level of production to transfer directly over, but there is a clear gap in terms of a second pass catcher. We've talked about, why I like Chigo Okonkwo as a tight end target because the wide receivers there just weren't it. Are you really going to rely on Treylon Burks to really stay on the field? Are we hoping for a resurgence of Luke McCaffrey? Resurgence even, you got to surge first. Are we hoping for some kind of miracle breakthrough for any one of those guys? I don't think so. Their depth is mediocre. You have the potential of Antonio Williams as a rookie coming through, but at the end of the day, Stephon Diggs goes in there and immediately becomes the wide receiver one. I think he's someone that I would feel comfortable with reaching well above ADP. Because ADP is a little slow to react here. Diggs right now is wide receiver 51 in real time ADP. That's a 12th round, mid 12th round pick. I would reach easily on Stephon Diggs. I have reached very easily on Stephon Diggs because it's warranted to go up much higher than that. Once you start getting in that range of where you're looking at guys and saying, okay, am I going to draft Jaden Reed? Am I going to draft, what's another wide receiver in that range? Jordan Addison, is cool, but we know there's a certain cap to his production. Yeah, I will reach and go a little bit higher and try to grab Stephon Diggs over some of those guys who just are more mediocre producers, like a Xavier Worthy, right? Especially with hearing that, Rashee Rice is back and Cyrus Allen is making a push so he could, fall back even further. So I'm pro Stephon Diggs to be the wide receiver 2 in that offense. I'm still good on Terry McLaurin. I mean, if anything, we might see Terry McLaurin's ADP drop a little bit. We're not seeing it right now because Terry McLaurin was butted up next to Luther Burden. So Luther Burden's injury dropping is kind of counteracting any of that fall that we would have naturally seen with Terry McLaurin. So, but he's still holding steady at a low end wide receiver 2. It might push back even further in drafts. So I'm good with either one of those because it's clear top 2 in those offenses. We do have, unfortunately, an injury that they had to deal with on the offensive line in Washington in Jeremiyah Tunsil, big offensive line investment that they made. And unfortunately, he is out indefinitely here, probably for the majority of the season. I don't know if it's officially the entire season, but regardless, it's a major injury that is going to affect things. I worry, unfortunately, what that could do slightly to Jaden Daniels, perhaps create more scrambling. But the real effect that I think it's going to have is on the run game there. We've been hearing a lot of positive stuff this is a tangent there as we talk about Stephon Diggs. We've been hearing a lot of positives around Ja'Cory Crosskey-Merritt and the progress that he's made. I'm very pro Ja'Cory Crosskey-Merritt. Just kind of keep your eye on that situation because if the offensive line is not gelling during preseason with the absence of Jeremiyah Tunsil, we might see an increased reliance on Rachaad White as a blocker there on passing down. So just keep that in mind. If they need a little extra protection, that could affect things. B. Stewart says, should we be worried about Emeka Egbuka's injury? No, it sounds like it's not a massive issue there. Loving Life says, any update on Josh Jacobs' legal situation? Nope, none whatsoever. Because the NFL said that the actual legal situation has to play out. And thus far, there have been no formal charges. So we're kind of in no man's land, which is why I'm treating it as we're pushing so close to the season with no clear legal action outside of the NFL that it makes it tough for us to say that there would be a judgment in terms of a punishment from the NFL in this season in particular. So I have been drafting Josh Jacobs as a borderline RB1 because assuming that legal situation would not play out for this season in particular. Champion Horse says, I'm trying to trade for Hurst. Just have a feeling that he is going to have a breakout sometime this year. Yeah, if you can. I drafted Hurst in Dynasty. I was in my bag on one of my rookie drafts. I did get Hurst and Denzel Boston. So I was in my rookie wide receiver bag this offseason, but I don't know if I would be willing to trade for him, but you could offer someone a sweetheart deal, right? To get him on your team. Because at the end of the day, even if Chris Godwin does bounce back to pre-injury Chris Godwin, he's 30 years old. And we're talking about an offense that should roll forward for the future with Emeka Egbuka and Ted Hurst, theoretically, with the way that they're talking about them. So get him if you can, man. for sure, because I do believe that the breakout is coming. So this is probably the lowest that we're going to be able to get him if you're trying to buy him. B. Stewart says, will Isaiah likely feast in New York? I think so. Frank Wright as an offensive coordinator I'm not really a fan, but he is tight end friendly. And Matt Nagy in general has never been, Jesus, I said, sorry, getting my Frank Wright. I was thinking about tight ends, and I don't know why I had Kenyon Sadiq in mind. That's the New York Jets. Sorry, Matt Nagy. Matt Nagy is tight end friendly. As much issues as I have with Matt Nagy, he has never been a big issue for tight ends in general. So Isaiah likely is looking like he's going to be the second look in that offense behind Malik Neighbors. Doesn't seem like any of the wide receivers are truly stepping up. When you hear news that Odell Beckham Jr. is looking fantastic, that's a red flag that the other receivers are struggling, right? Because Odell has gone over the hill and back. So from that perspective, we're hearing a lot of positive things. So I do feel comfortable with Isaiah likely as a target for your actual starting tight end. I would feel really comfortable with it as well. Kelsey Burt Audio says, do you keep Tony Pollard or George Kittle? I would take, depends. Well, I would take the risk and keep George Kittle, honestly. Tony Pollard's production can be found. And quite frankly, it's not like you would have to be clamoring to have to draft Tony Pollard again. But Tony Pollard's production can be found. I mean, he's an RB1, solid, but he's going as an RB3, right? And that's pretty much the value that you should expect to get for him. George Kittle, I'm still not convinced will be ready for week 1, but at least we have seen him active running. Like it looks like he is tracking. So even if he doesn't start immediately or if he starts on the pup, I would prefer to at least shoot for that higher upside with Kittle versus the, standard production that we would get there from Tony Pollard there. Thank you for the super chat there from Russia Walton. Appreciate that. Jermaine says, so no wide receiver this year is what I'm hearing. Yeah. Yes, 100%. If that has not, I have not specifically said that, but that is a very good deduction there. I can't think of any scenario, honestly, other than wild league settings where I would start off wide receiver this year. Can't do it. Just because, again, with the level of depth that we have in round 1 and 2 with running backs, you got to take at least one there for sure. So can't do it. And then we'll do one more question and then we'll head out here. RPJDD says, Barkley or another stud wide receiver in PPR keeper? I have wide receivers, Chase and Lamb. And then RB, James Cook. We start with 3 wide receivers and flex. I would actually, I would go Barkley. I would go Barkley, honestly, because mid-round wide receiver still has some value in it, and you've already got Chase and Lamb. So if you pair up Barkley and Cook, I mean, that's such an advantage there. I would lean towards Barkley on that one. And then one more here from actually with 2 more here. We'll keep going just like a tiny bit here. Bad Sports says, finally able to see you live. Yay. Question, what kind of league am I in? Start 9, 1 to 2 QBs, 1 to 4 RBs, 1 to 4 wide receivers, 1 to 4 tight ends, and 1 kicker. Well, I mean, that's one of those. So are you asking if you're drafting in that and you're not sure? That's a good flexibility league. In terms of what is that? You're just mainly starting flexes, right? So it's 1 to 2. You do have to start 1 quarterback, but then you have a lot of flexibility in terms of whether or not you're starting wide receivers or tight ends. So in that situation, if you're asking about like strategy on that one, I mean, you have the ability to only start 1 running back. Is that what what type? Yeah. You were asking. Cool. Yeah. Have the ability. It's more of a flex league there in terms of the ability to not have to actually start multiple running backs and wide receivers there for sure, which does give you, it depends on your scoring settings as well. Take a look at the scoring settings on that one and see if there's any kind of positional lean, because you could, just draft one hero RB and then hammer wide receiver on that one in terms of your strategy. This one is a good one here. Let's do this one and then one more there. From Watashin. I can't from Watashin National. Sorry, I don't think I got your username right. But says, is Malik Neighbors okay to draft? Yes. I feel good about it. Obviously this offseason, I was very skeptical, right? Because the reports were vague. Obviously our video footage was limited literally to one video of him at a celebrity golf or celebrity softball game, right? But everything looks good to go now. My only hesitation, right, is that hopefully the ADP doesn't push up too high, because I do worry about the pass volume and volatility there from Jackson Dart. We're not getting good reports out of camp, and good reports or bad reports out of camp don't necessarily mean things. But man, it sounds like he's struggling there. But at the end of the day, he is, again, those other wide receivers are not coming through, unfortunately. So it's probably going to be another 150 plus target year for Malik Neighbors on that end. So even with the volatility of Jackson Dart, I would still be okay with drafting Neighbors, especially because I do not think he's going to push up too high. I would not see him ascending over an AJ Brown at this point. And then one more question here from Casey Coleman. I think Harold Fannin Jr. could be catching the ball like crazy in garbage time. I really like him. Yeah, I like him. I also like the two rookie receivers as well. I do not like Jerry Jeudy. And at the same time, when we look at the Cleveland Browns, their defense is still going to be good enough to where they're being competitive in games. So I don't anticipate massive blowouts there. Obviously, the quarterback situation is still sketchy, but they have upgraded the offensive line significantly. The offensive line was the real issue last season there. So I do like Harold Fannin Jr. At cost is perfectly fine. And then I also both really like Concepcion and Denzel Boston as well, because they're going like wide receiver 50 or later. That's just egregious in terms of where they should be going. So there are also two that I like as well. Saying Darren Waller signs with the Panthers. I just can't see any updates here, but I'll look and see. Yeah, you're saying Darren Waller signed with the Panthers. No, I don't think it really changed. Well, the only bad thing that it could change is maybe taking some touchdowns away from Tataroa McMillan. But honestly, I mean, Dave Canales hasn't significantly used tight end to a high degree in terms of consistent target share. So while theoretically, in terms of talent, Darren Waller is an upgrade on Jatavian Sanders, I don't think it's that deep. It wouldn't make me push Tetaroa back any further or worry about Jalen Coker. So no, I don't think it changes too much. Let's just cross our fingers that he can make it through 3 games, 4 games, 5 games. Can he do that? That's the only thing, unfortunately, there. And then one more question here with Kenyon Sadiq. I think it's worth it. Kyle's audio says, what are your thoughts on Kenyon Sadiq? He's worth it. Just taking a late round stab. It's literally in deeper leagues, right? Where you're looking to like a deeper, maybe a tight end premium or something, where you have a deep enough bench to where you can roster multiple tight ends. I would stash him and see. Sounds like, my only apprehensive would be that, is the injury, how major is the injury, right? In terms of him having that setback regarding his hernia. That's the only issue. You worry about if you had a setback, is that something that could be a recurring issue that lingers into the season? But other than that, man, it sounds like Omar Cooper Jr. is not it, which is not surprising. Like, I was not very high on him as a prospect. It sounds like he is pushing back, unfortunately. So we're still looking for that solidified wide receiver 2 to play opposite of Garrett Wilson. We need just a second look in general. And Kenyon Sadiq could be the second look as a tight end in that offense. And I did mention Frank Wright before. He is tight end friendly, as I was saying before. So I'm okay with stashing Sadiq for sure. And then last question here, Jelly of the month. Thoughts on the Luther Burden injury? Was going to try and keep him in the 11th, but probably pivot to Tootin in the 15th. I would still go with Burden. I know it's worrisome, but the 11th is still really good value for Burden. I wouldn't overreact too much. It might just be a safety perspective of like, hey, we don't need to push him. It's not as if he's a rookie, let him heal up fully, give him, basically a full month off until week 1. So we're not going to see him in preseason, right? That's the only bad thing there. And technically speaking, if the ADP pushes back a little bit, obviously you could keep Tootin and still draft Luther Burden. But I still think he's a fine target, right? Because in the context of Chicago, the target funnel is really settled down to Colston Loveland, Luther Burden, and Rome Odunze there. So I like all 3 of them. I would still lean towards Luther Burden on that one. But if you don't want to deal with it, or if you feel like you prefer the value on Tootin, I totally understand that. All right there. Oh, and then thank you. Super chat there on Bad Sports says, thank you. I will call it multi-flex. Yes, that is what I would call it. Multi-flex makes sense there in terms of the league style for that kind of lineup. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you for the super chat. Appreciate that. And then shout out to Casey Coleman saying they're big Carolina fan there. Tommy Trimble scores all of the touchdowns and then says, Tara, go Clemson. My wife went to LSU and you're from Clemson. So you need the upset. God, I hope so. I just want us to go out there and look competent, not embarrass ourselves. And that's sad to say that I'm like, hey, I want the win, but at the very least, guys, can we just not look foolish out there? I cannot believe, God. And I have to do a betting video on that. They assigned me my company has assigned me a betting video specifically on Clemson versus LSU. In addition, I'm doing multiple college football betting throughout the entire season, but I was like, man, you really had to call that one out for me. God, that's painful. But that wraps things up. When I saw it on the schedule, I was like, come on, did you have to put that one on the schedule for me to do? But hey, that means college football season is close. So we are almost there, people. But I appreciate you tuning in. Thank you so much, guys. I am here with you live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. EST. So as always, make sure that you're liking the video, just helps out the channel as well. And then subscribe so you don't miss any of my live shows and videos that I'm dropping multiple every single week. And it'll obviously pick up the pace even more once we get in season because I'll have waiver wire videos, ranking videos, trade videos, stash videos, all that good stuff. And then, of course, the live shows will carry in season. So make sure that you are following me and also Player Profiler as well. Other than that, guys, I will talk to you all next week where we will have lots to discuss because we will have actual multiple preseason games with actual starters that we didn't even get to talk about, FYI. But we will talk about it next week. We're going to see actual starters this week. So enjoy the preseason football games, guys. I'll talk to you all next week.
From the Podfather to you, I deeply appreciate you tuning in. And many ask, what can I do? What can I do to help support the hosts, the research they do, the production costs? Go to playerprofiler.com, Dynasty Deluxe, World Famous Draft Kit, Rankings, DFS Dominator, and of course, data analysis. Subscribe to any one of those, and you support all of us and take Player Profiler to the moon.